This is a Sports Catastrophe production.
Hey there, Heather. Ho there. It's Jeff Cutter welcoming you to another Sports Catastrophe on this date. And on this day, March 31st, 1975, John Wooden, one of the greatest head coaches in basketball history, not just in college basketball, but in pro history, maybe as well, retired on top, as many athletes have retired but not on top, with exceptions such as Peyton Manning and Michael Strahan. But anyhow, John Wooden retired on top as the UCLA Bruins took care of Kentucky in the national championship game 92-85. So the 75 tournament, as opposed to the 2024 tournament, had only 32 schools, and there were a few conferences that had multiple teams in it. Anyway, the championship game was at San Diego Sports Arena. And there were 36 games, including a third place game in each region. So the bracket actually went from 25 teams in 1974 to 32 teams in 1975, mostly bolstered by the fact that after a critical ACC title game in 1974, that's NC State beat Maryland. But the fact of the matter is that both teams could not make the tournament. Only one of them could make the tournament, despite them both being top 5 in the NCAA at the time. Basically got the NCAA to say, you know what, screw it. We're going to add more teams, and you don't have to win your conference tournament as long as you do well. So anyway, the bracket went to 32 teams. 7 teams made their NCAA tournament debuts. San Diego State, kind of the home team, if you will. UNLV, Rutgers, Montana, Alabama, Middle Tennessee, and Central Michigan. This was the first most new teams, most debutant teams since 1956. Alabama actually won the SEC championship in 1956, but were not allowed to play in the tournament because their entire starting lineup played as freshmen, and that was against the rules at the time. They actually tied for the 74 SEC title with Vanderbilt, but because Vanderbilt was ranked higher, Bama had to sit at home. So anyway, this was actually the last tournament in which third place games would be in each regional. So you have your regional final and all that to qualify for the Final Four. They would have a third place game to allow those who made the regional final, well, the Sweet 16 or the regional semis, a second game after they lost. Well, that's kind of pathetic in my mind, of course. Yeah, so there were a lot of factors, of course. The ACC tournament, all that. And USC was actually ranked 5th, but they were runner-up in the conference. So, anyway. But the selection criteria actually threatened to exclude Northeastern teams because they didn't belong to conferences. But some Northeastern colleges and universities would actually have what they call regional tournaments, and the winner of that would get one of the spots. So anyway, that's what would happen and all that. Anyway, it was a huge game and all that. The East region saw Syracuse get out after beating LaSalle, North Carolina, and Kansas State. Kentucky and Indiana faced each other in a tight Mid-Eastern final because Indiana was one of the top teams in the country in 1975, and Kentucky also was good too. So after Indiana beat UTEP and Oregon State, and Kentucky took care of Marquette and Central Michigan, they met each other, and Kentucky narrowly won 92-90 over Bob Knight, which would be huge. But never fear, Bob Knight would get his national title the next year in 1976 with an undefeated squad, the last undefeated squad to win a championship. The Midwest region saw Louisville get into the Final Four after beating Rutgers, Cincy, and Maryland. And UCLA with John Wooden had to go to overtime against Michigan in the first round. Beat them. Beat Montana by 3, and then they took care of Arizona State quite easily. So anyway, then came the Final Four. Kentucky in the first semifinal crushed Syracuse into fine powder 95-79. However, Louisville and UCLA would play a tight matchup and all that. This wasn't the same UCLA squad that had won like 8 straight titles and all that. Louisville was led by former Wooden assistant Danny Crump, and it was close. UCLA had to rally to force overtime and came back from overtime on a last second shot by Richard Washington that took care of Louisville. It was one of the most shocking matches around. But anyway, so it's the 1975. So, of course, UCLA lost the 1974 NCAA tournament in the Final Four, which ended the streak of 7 straight national championships. They won 9 of the previous 11 seasons. So it was huge and all that. John Wooden would actually announce after the semifinal game against Louisville that he would retire at the end of the championship game against Kentucky. Kentucky had Joe B. Hall. The previous season, they were actually only 500. Fortunately, though, Kentucky came back, and it was a huge win for Kentucky to take care of Indiana, who were 30-0 at the time. So anyway, there was like 15,000 things and all that. So anyway, it would be huge and all that. The first half would have a furious pace. There were 5 ties and the lead changed 15 times. And it looked like UCLA was tight early and wanted so badly to get John Wooden to win his title and go out as a winner. Anyway, UCLA looked pretty impressive and took a 43-40 lead headed to the second half. UCLA had a lead of up to 6 a couple times, but Kentucky would rally both times to cut it down to 2. But UCLA didn't give up as Dave Myers and Richard Washington put up key shots and all that. Kentucky was down 76-75 with 7 minutes left. And then Myers was called for an offensive foul, which he bumped into Kentucky's Gravy. Myers responded strongly to the call and was hit with a technical foul, which prompted Wooden to run in the court and call the referee a crook. Kentucky had a technical foul shot and also free throws from the original call. We retained possession, so the Wildcats could gain the lead with 3 free throws. Unfortunately, Gravy missed both free throws when he needed to, and Kentucky fell flat and all that. Kentucky tried a couple times in the final few minutes to do well, but UCLA would put up key points, and the UCLA Bruins won 92-85, knocking off Kentucky and sending John Wooden off the court as a champion. UCLA had a 48% field goal rate, and their free throws were not as good. They were only 64% from the line. Kentucky made 38% of their shots and made more free throws, in a sense. Gravy would lead the point totals for both teams with 34 for Kentucky and did pretty well for himself. Goyette would have 16 points and Flynn with 10. The only 3 Wildcard players in double digits. 4 Bruins had 10 or more points. Richard Washington had 28 to pace the Bruins and was named most outstanding player. Dave Myers had 24 points. Trugovich had 16 and Drollinger got 10. So anyway, it was a massive win for UCLA as they were the champions. Having some good players like Dave Myers, Richard Washington, Marquise Johnson, Pete Trugovich, Ralph Drollinger, and Andre McCarter. Anyway, Kentucky ended up being 20-10 in 1976 and could not qualify for the NCAA tournament. They went to the regional final in 77, well, the Elite Eight, and lost. But then they won the national title in 1978, which broke a 20-year drought. Gene Bartow would be the head coach for UCLA to succeed Wooden after he retired. LA didn't have any bad fallout from Wooden's retirement. They won 27 games and got to the Final Four the next year, which was huge. UCLA would wait 4 more years till 1980 to get to the national title game, which they lost. And then 1995, they won the title, finally breaking a 20-year drought themselves. So that was kind of weird how numerology worked. But John Wooden went out a winner, and that's all that matters. Anyhow, I'm Jeff Diamond.